Okay guys, in this short video, I want to address a claim that's normally made against the Quran. It's an age-old claim. It was made by the Orientalists. It's been refuted several times by many people academically. However, unfortunately, some people even today make similar claims to this. And the reason I believe they make them is because it gives them an escape route from having to study or engage with the Quran itself. And the claim in a nutshell is this, that the Quran is a combination of bits of Christianity, bits of Judaism, bits of Arab culture and tradition, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, brought all of these things together and produced the Quran, right? Now, before I go into this, and I want to touch upon this from three different perspectives, but before we do this, let me give you guys a very simple analogy which may put things into perspective. This is a tafsir, it's an exegesis by Ibn Kathir on the Quran. This is a history by Ibn Kathir. Now, if I was to study both of these texts, I can come to one of two possible conclusions, which is number one, that this text here copied this text. Why? Well, because I find things in here which are also mentioned in here, or vice versa. Or the second conclusion I can come to is, well, it's from the same source. It's the same author. Therefore, I'm bound to find things in here which are mentioned in here, wherever relevant, right? Both are reasonable conclusions. I would say the latter is more reasonable. And the point I'm trying to get across here is that when it comes to the Quran, just because you find things in the Quran which may be found in other texts or scriptures, or similar stories may be mentioned in those scriptures, it doesn't logically, automatically follow that the Quran copied these scriptures and texts. It's completely reasonable to understand, and what we are taught in the Islamic tradition is what we find in the Quran as well, is that the source is the same. It's the same creator. It's the same God that sent previous messengers to previous nations with revelation, that sent the final revelation to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Right? Very reasonable. And what we have to do is first and foremost go to the Quran itself. The Quran makes it very clear. For example, in the 10th chapter of the Quran, God says, وَلِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٌ وَلِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٌ, that God sent messengers to every single nation, in a simple translation. God sent messengers to every single nation, meaning that God sent revelation messengers to guide people back to their creator. And therefore, if it's the same source, as we know from Islam, if it's the same source, the same creator, you're going to find the same message, the similar message, right? And that's what we find. And what's interesting is that in Islam, we don't believe that God has sent something brand new. This is not a brand new religion or way of life. The Quran, Islam makes it very, very clear that the core fundamental message was being exactly the same throughout history, especially when it comes to God and who He is and who we are and what our purpose is. Obviously, certain things may change, such as certain laws and practices. However, the core fundamentals have always been the same. Hence, I'm not surprised, and we shouldn't be surprised, that we find things in the Quran that we find even in the Bible in the state that it's in today, right? Although we know it's gone through changes, right? So there's no problem from that perspective when you look at what the Quran has to say itself. Secondly, let's take a historical look for a second. Now, we know no one is denying that at the time of revelation, at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, there were Christians and Jews around. For example, we know there was Jews in Yathrib, in Medina, and we know there was Christians in Najran. And we even know that there were possibly some Christians and Jews around in Mecca too, right? And that being the case, the Arabs, including the Prophet, peace be upon him, would have known about Christians and Jews, right? And but here's the thing, the Orientalists, when they acknowledge this reality, what they also point out is that at best, the Prophet, peace be upon him, could have only had superficial second-hand knowledge from these individuals and about these traditions, because the original texts were not translated in Arabic at the time. And on top of this, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, traveled, for example, by caravan, he had very little time. He was engaging in trade, and whatever time he had, whatever engagements he possibly could have had with the Jews and the Christians, he would have got bits and pieces of information. Now, the Orientalists also acknowledge that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was a very intelligent man. Now, a question that arises from this, and that we should all ask, is, well, why would an intelligent individual claim a revelation based on a tradition or other texts which he doesn't fully understand the ins and outs of, the details of? It doesn't make any sense. Why would he do this? Wouldn't he be afraid that he will be caught out, that people would question him and catch him out on bits and pieces? It doesn't really make sense. And on top of this, what's even more interesting is that the Quran actually corrects the Christian and Jewish beliefs in certain aspects from the very beginning, especially when it comes to monotheism and the correct understanding of the oneness of God. The Quran corrects these things. And for you to be able to correct something, you have to understand that thing fully. But as the Orientalists themselves acknowledge, the Prophet, peace be upon him, at best had superficial knowledge about these traditions, right? So it just doesn't add up. Something doesn't make sense, because the Quran throughout, and when the Quran speaks about the Christians and their beliefs and the Jews and their beliefs, it speaks about it with knowledge. You can see that it makes sense. It has deep knowledge, understanding, or it gives us deep knowledge and understanding of these traditions. We can see that the author knows what they're talking about. And we obviously believe the author is God. So indeed, he will know about everything and anything, right? So it just doesn't add up. And there's a brilliant book by Muhammad Mohr Ali, The Quran and the Orientalist. And this book, especially in the second section, he goes into a lot of detail and he really breaks this down and sort of completely from an academic perspective refutes this whole idea of the Quran borrowing from Judaic and Christian sources. However, there's one more point I want to touch upon before we conclude this video, and that is the character of the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself. Now, this is a point that we use in our Dawah training courses, and it's actually, for me, this is one of the most powerful points. Now, here's what we need to consider. When someone makes something up, when someone lies, in other words, they always do it for a reason. There is always an objective or motive behind lying. It's not just natural for someone to wake up and say, well, today I'm going to lie. Today I just feel like lying, so I'm going to lie. No, there's always a reason behind it. Now, when we analyze the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, we know there was instances where the Meccans, they offered the Prophet everything. They said, look, have whatever you want. Money, power, women, position, whatever you want, we'll give it to you. Just stop preaching this message that you're bringing. The Prophet, peace be upon him, rejects all of these things. He, in a few words, says that he will continue to preach this message, and he rejects every single thing that's offered to him. Right? This results in the Muslims being boycotted, being beaten, being tortured, X, Y, and Z. Now, something to really consider here. This event clearly shows to us that the Prophet, peace be upon him, didn't have any worldly motives or goals in mind behind delivering this message, right? And therefore, how can we claim him a liar? Because he has no motives, no objectives from a worldly perspective. What is there to gain for him? He's been offered everything, he's rejected everything. Therefore, as an overall point, how can we claim that he lied about this message? What would be his reasons and motives to combine these different traditions and to make a new religion? Some Orientalists have sometimes made the claim, it was a good lie, it was a white lie, right? That he saw there was moral issues within society. He saw there was an opportunity amongst the Arabs to claim prophethood because there wasn't any prophets amongst them. He knew of the Judaic Christian prophets, and they had this tradition of prophets in their way of life. And therefore he thought, good idea, let's become a prophet so I can morally reform society. Again, when he's offered everything, all he has to say is, well, look, guys, give me the power to morally reform society. I don't want anything else, and I will compromise the message. Because his objective is met then. However, like we said, he was offered all of these things, but he rejects this. And this clearly shows that his motives weren't moral reform. Right? He had like I said before, had no worldly motives in mind. Therefore, he must be telling the truth. That the claim that he was a messenger of God, that he was getting revelation from God, must be true. Any reasonable and rational person, if you just think about the few points that I've mentioned today, and maybe study the book that I've given you reference to further, you will see that this claim that the Quran is a combination of Judaic text and Christian text and a bit of Arab culture and tradition, X, Y, and Z, it just hasn't got much weight, right? It's really just fluff, to be very honest. And I would really encourage that anyone that's looking into studying the Quran to do this. And I'm sure when you read the Quran yourself, you will see things in it, you will see passages in it, you would read it and you will understand that this has to, it cannot be a copy of previous texts. If anything, this is the divine speaking to humanity and reminding humanity of the purpose of the existence, which is, as all of the previous prophets did throughout history, which is to worship their Creator, know their Creator. And when we fulfill this purpose to the best of our ability, we have the best in this life and the next life.